figure something out. I don't know. I'm gonna pause. Hello, everyone. And in the chat, I am going to drop in the agenda notes. So Tiffany and Katie, if that's okay with you, that's
yes. I'm sorry. Can you say that one more time? I was saying goodbye to my family.
Okay, you're kicking your family out? What?
The best internet is in the living room, and so yes, I have to tell them all to leave.
So happy Wednesday. Thank you all for joining us for the Goal 3 call and for our popcorn question today. The question is, do you have a goal? I think it's almost like a New Year's resolution or something like that. But do you have a goal or intention that you've set for yourself this year or in the past? So I will kick it off. Well, so because I'm thinking about it and I have the answer, I will share so it gives everyone time to think. So the goal that I set for myself this year is that I was going to work on sustainable me, because for the past forever, I've supported my ex-husband in starting businesses. I've raised a child who's now on the other end of the earth, and so now it's my turn. So I want to create and collaborate and work on something that's about me, for me, and something that I want to work on. So that's what I want to do. Katie, you look like you're intentional. What's your answer?
I must be psychic because I knew I was going to be next. So actually, I had a chance in one of our launch programs last fall to write my personal vision statement for the first time. And it was by accident because personal vision statement is the first thing in the Kaufman Fast Track curriculum. And I was critiquing theirs that were not very good. And they said, well, we don't know what you're looking for then. Surely you have one that's perfect. Show us yours. And I did not have one that was perfect, did not have one at all. So I wrote my personal statement. And so my goal this year is to start fulfilling my personal vision statement, which was to work less on Wake Tech and more on things that I value, which is entrepreneurship as the life and leadership skills of the future, and to write more. So it's kind of like working on me, Cecilia, as well. In fact, I have a mandate from my daughter that on Friday, I am to take no phone calls. I'm to do no work for anything other than me. So, and she's mean, so I have to do what she says. So that's my goal. I'm gonna jump over to Christine.
Oh my gosh, Katie, I knew you were gonna call my name too.
You're psychic too.
It is psychic class. Also, Katie, it feels like you have a secret portal in your house. I don't know if everyone else's computer, but your doorway looks like it's blue because I think the background, but it looks like there's like a secret portal in your house. Great shares thus far. The intention that I had for this year, someone asked at the end of last year at a board meeting, and the word land came to mind, and there was multiple meanings for that. One, I joke about, like, I really would like to land the ESHIP plane, like, or the ESHIP boat, whatever analogy works there. I don't know what works there, but landing the ship in terms of, the deliver portion and really making sure that the communities and the people that we're trying to help really feel supported by the work that we're doing. And then land myself, like, in a physical place, which COVID has, generously offered all of us together, and being more integrated with the land, and just, I haven't eaten meat since December, and just being more mindful. I love meat, and so land was the word that I used for my intention. I will tag Team Peter, since I think you're off mute already.
Oh, thanks. Well, mine just became much more situational. I don't have what's immediately on my mind now is that through an odd confluence. I had my blood tested last week, and it turns out that I have had COVID sometime apparently in February, because that's when I remember being sick. And so I figured I'll do some good. So I'm donating blood on Friday. So we'll see if anybody wants any Greek blood out there. But my sister's, yeah, it's not so novel. My sister's actually pretty excited, only because she's infectious disease and she's been treating with people with COVID. So she was welcoming me to do this. So never given blood before, thought I'd do it. And I did say to a bunch of people, I told you so, because nobody believed that I actually had come down with something. And I told folks around my house and others that I thought I had. So anyway, I'll throw it over to Andy.
Can you restate the question one more time?
So if you have, tell us about a goal or intention you've set for yourself.
Okay. As we all have been discussing, sorting through life with the post-COVID, I would say one thing that I have found helpful and created time for is actually meditative practices. And man, it's so hard to sit still for 10 minutes. Just sit in place, don't think of anything, that's it. And you're like, oh my God, this is so hard. And I'm really bad at it. So I'm slowly improving, but man, that's a goal to get better at that. Who hasn't gone? Hassan?
Thanks, Andy. It's a lot of different goals, but really a primary one is spend more time with family and friends. I appreciate the one-on-one more. And I think prior to this, and when I say family, I'm not talking about my wife and my son, just extended family and friends. I think everything was always like really short prior to this, and I don't think I valued like the one-on-ones as much as I value it now. Is there anybody left? Is everybody?
Sure.
Hey, Brett. Yeah, Brett.
All right, so goal, the piece of me that's been lost in all this is missing live music. And so my goal is to see as many concerts as possible once it becomes safe to do so again. And it feels like it's gonna be a really long time. But I'm already I was thinking last night, I've already missed 3 and the 4th one's coming up, and it's just sad for my soul. So I'm working on it. And yeah, Christina, yeah, the virtual concerts are interesting. There's a lot of archive stuff going up from bands I love. I'm really pleased with them doing that. But this whole virtual thing is going to be interesting. The drive-in concert's going to be interesting too. We'll see how that goes. Yeah. Oh, was there anybody else? Did anyone just pop in?
Yep, Christine's put it in the chat. So CJ, Mike, Tiffany, Volto.
Well, CJ's got that great wine cellar going. I'm going to give it to him.
Yeah, so lately I've been committed to drinking a lot of wine, as you can see. Just kidding. I've actually, well, my life been very goal oriented, so there's nothing new there except for 2 things. One is I'm actually more committed to not being goal oriented, but being systems oriented. And if any of you have been following goals versus systems, that has really been working out well, and particularly of how I parcel out my time, and very, very scheduled, but I'm able to do a lot more. And I used to be committed to single tasking, because I've heard that was a good thing. For me, that has not worked out. So now I'm becoming better at taking on a lot of different goals, and it tends to focus me a lot more. And the other one that I'm trying to work hard on is to get more sleep. I don't know how to do it, but I've really been trying. I'm not one of those who have needed sleep or who look forward to naps, but I'm really having to force myself to get at least 7 hours of sleep at night. And I can tell you, for those of you who sleep well, for me, it's been a struggle. So I'm focusing on that as much as I have of any other goals. I really got here late to avoid this, but I guess not. Oh, is there anybody left here?
Yes.
Okay. Tiffany then.
So my goal is to become more business savvy. I feel like I understand community engagement and how to collaborate. I love connecting people, but what the entrepreneurs really need in our community is like technical assistance. And instead of referring them out to other people, I really want to try to understand some even basic business principles so I can be of more direct assistance to them, especially as their needs have grown during this crisis. So that's my goal. Mike, how about you?
Thanks, Tiffany. Hi, everybody. My goal to this point has been to get to this point with our family, which was that my wife, Kara, who's dealing with breast cancer, has gotten through her surgery and 12 full-on weekly chemo treatments. Thank you. And so that was, that has really been our goal. That has been our horizon, and have not looked too far beyond it. So especially with everything now, weekly trips to the hospital is one that we're just like, all right, we'll get to that point. And being on the other side of that now, it's still, she goes every 3 weeks, and she has started a pill that she takes for 5 to 10 years, which is tamoxifen. And so she has 9 more months of these trips every 3 weeks, which we'll see where the world heads over the next 9 months. But really our goal was to get here, and grateful we're here. And I think the goals we're thinking about now, you know, in some way they're more diffuse and a little further out, but I think trying to get through and just get by in a way that's healthy for us, and wanting to try and find those places where we feel we can help in our local communities and in our networks, and just trying to bring whatever we can. So I know it's right now a general goal, and I just tied to that, I think, you know, I appreciate the people talking about various versions of self-care, because I think it's really easy to miss that. So, you know, I had this kind of weird heart incident a night in the ER, and so I'm, yes, trying to pay attention a little bit to myself and kind of the small things that add up to big things. So I think paying attention is probably the closest thing I can call a daily goal. But it feels good to be here. So I'd love to hear from Valto.
Thanks, Mike. So, and great to hear that achievement, one step. So yeah, from my perspective, I have this kind of like, if separating the work stuff is in a lot of the work stuff is related to making sure there's progress all the time, so that even if there's some steps backward sometimes, that anyway it's bringing the focus back to progress. But more on the personal side, there's one goal that never can be perfectly achieved, and that's focusing on balance. So whenever there's, you know, you're juggling, you're taking on new things, you're giving up something, you're, you know, things move that way or this way, you can always focus on trying to balance yourself to make sure that, you know, you don't let any of the dimensions got too far out of hand. So that's a good thing. It's more of an ongoing thing. It's like I can always go back to that. So okay, are things balanced enough so I can kind of handle this, whatever kind of new stuff comes in. And the funny thing is that you can always challenge yourself and do more and still find again a balance. So it's an interesting process to look at. It's kind of like, you know, surfing. You have to you can always keep going bigger and faster on things, and you can still find a balance in it. So that's kind of my thing.
And I think Eric is who's left.
Yeah, Eric, passing on to you.
Hey, thanks. I'll say it's an intention. I'm not succeeding all that well, but it's writing a little bit every day. Actually, I guess I'm doing a little bit of that, but just kind of doing something beyond just like the social media and trying to structure some pieces that are a little more valuable for Medium or other kinds of other platforms. So not necessarily all about work or all closely related to work, but that's my intention. And I don't know, I'll be kind to myself today and I'll give myself a B+.
That's great. Thank you. So I dropped the link for the chat. I think everybody went, right? So, and I know that this seems a little bit more tedious and drawn out, especially because it's such an open question, but I think that when you're trying to set missions, visions, goals, and intentions for an entire community, it's really helpful to get us grounded and thinking about what we want to achieve in ourselves as ecosystem builders, and we bring that heart and mind to this work. So so thank you for the indulgence. The other thing is, of course, that it creates deeper, richer community because we get to know each other a little bit better. So so there's a sandbox document that so many of you have written on, and it's lovely. So I know Hassan and Beth worked really hard on those questions, and Tiffany and Valto have really been mindful about this stuff. So I want to, and Valto last time shared the canvas. So I want to leave it to you to lead and tell us which way you want to go with this.
I have a quick document to share. It could well be an input into some of our work, but I know that we've spent a lot of time trying to define the space of what it is we need and how we think about this. I need to just check with my colleague to make sure that I can actually share this information more permanently, but for now, is it okay if I just share my screen and show this? Okay, just pull it up. So this is work we're doing with the Global Commons Alliance, and many groups obviously are working with some of the same stuff we are around understanding mission, vision, and values across lots of people and organizations that have their own versions of that or their own ideas about what they ought to be and how they ought to work and what content should be in them. So I know that we're doing some of that in that world, and I just thought there's some of it that might be potentially valuable here. So does anybody know Jim Collins? He's the author of Good to Great, Built to Last. He's one of the names in there. So my colleague Andor has been pulling together some really useful information about what do we mean by a vision framework. What are the pieces that make that up? There's some language here that may or may not resonate. I'll just say that for me, big, hairy, audacious goal has played out a bit. So just to say, take the language for what it's worth, but some of the ideas might be really valuable. So the part that I want to kind of get, and you can see just sort of how this document is working, but it's trying to lay out a foundation for what do we mean by a vision? What are the things we might consider as part of that? What are some of the ways that other people might think about this? Here's a point of view that I thought was maybe valuable. A vision is 3 basic elements: an organization's fundamental reason for existence, often called its mission or purpose, its timeless, unchanging core values, and then the big goal. And then it talks through some of the language on how we should think about those, how we separate them and think of those different ideas, the values, the goal itself, and then some examples of those. And I'll just go down to, here's some, high-level core purpose statements. Again, I hope for this to be kind of a reference document more than anything, and then examples of goals, and then some big ones of some very well-known organizations, as potential guidance. And then examples of values. So like I said, I'm going to see if I can share this. I'll just stop now. But what I'd love is to know what level of alignment we think we have on some of that stuff. And maybe it's really high. I think Valto's Canvas does a great job at creating sort of a space for that. This, like I said, just kind of seemed to me another piece of reference that might help us either agree or disagree with some of what it's trying to lay out, and see if there's some valuable information there. So wanted to introduce it as something that might be helpful, and for now, nothing else.
I thought it was really interesting, Mike, that Nike's goal was to crush Adidas.
That stood out for me too.
That's, I mean, you know, thinking about like the infinity game and how it should be in perpetuity. And I thought, well, what do you do after you crush Adidas? I think it's done, right?
Yeah. So, and who's the evil foundation that Kaufman can maybe try and set up as our villain?
Feels
Crush
like
Gordon and Betty Moore.
Feels like their 1985 goal was crush Adidas. You know,
that could well be after a meeting with Michael Jordan. So I don't know, but
yeah.
So how is a goal different from a vision? Like, how would Nike's goal of crushing Adidas be different than their vision? And what does that mean for this group?
Yeah, North Star was mentioned. Vision is always like, what do you want it to look like at the end? I think the sandbox question started to go down that path really well. But what do we want it to look like at the end? And the goal is more like a measurable, more narrow way of seeing that we've made progress towards that overall vision. They can be incremental, they can be, you know, overarching, but they kind of serve as the guideposts along the way to tell us how well we're doing in getting to that vision.
So vision is the place on the horizon where we want to be, and the goal is the steps to getting there. What role does the mission play in this schematic? Because I see a lot of people getting confused between the vision and the mission.
I've personally always heard mission described as, you know, it comes from the word for to send. So what are the things, the activities you're actually doing to get there? So it's more specific about the space that you're choosing to engage in, is the way I've heard it described.
So there's vision, then mission, then goals.
I'd like to point out maybe a different way of thinking about it is the mission is your marching orders when you start. The vision is where you're trying to get to. So they're kind of bookends.
And then where does purpose fall? Or does purpose fall in all of that?
So I would say that the purpose falls in why are we doing this for the first place? Like why does this need to exist? So it's more like many can have, you know, competing like Nike and Adidas there. So one question would be like, does there need to be yet another sporting, you know, thing out there? So the purpose is more like, why do we need to exist? Like, isn't this getting solved without us? Or is there actually a reason that we need to exist? So I guess that's the purpose.
And then so following like Simon Sinek's example, I guess, is that what we would start with? Like, would we start with the purpose before we got into the vision? Or is that old thinking?
I mean, just from my perspective, that all of us are here is kind of the rationale of that we want to be here and it's needed. And we have kind of come together and hovering together for that. So kind of the purpose exists there. I think it's like written in different places in different ways, but I think the things to then make a difference comes from like, okay, we are here. So then what is then the goal that we're trying to achieve, and what is our mission that we are going to kind of go after? that's just kind of how I think about it.
So it sounds like it's really important when we land on whether the mission is how or the mission is why, or I
Well,
think we. Go ahead.
Sorry, one more quick thought. I mean, just again, recalling these are all tools and different people may define things differently, but it's what do we decide is useful? And so if we decide to say, hey, there's overlap between the ways that people think about a mission and a purpose, or between goals and a vision, in some ways, laying out, the pieces that we decide are important for our work, and having language around those that resonates with people and that people have some level of ownership of, is more important than making sure we line up exactly with what one person or another believes a particular piece is supposed to be or how it's supposed to work.
So I'm from my perspective, I think for any of this type of similar work, we also need to look at like, how does the deliverable should look like what is the purpose of that tool that we are creating, and if we think like, okay, we have to have a common vision for the field and these types of things. So how does that end deliverable actually look like, and how can that deliverable be in such shape that it's most like practical as a tool, because that's what it is. It's just a tool to get people aligned when they're working independently or collectively on different groups, that they are all, doing kind of collectively towards the same goal instead of, playing in all kinds of directions. And also acting as a tool, what includes into our activity and what can we exclude, because we can't do everything if we want to be productive and effective. So we need to have a tool to also define what doesn't belong to our responsibility, that belongs to someone else. No matter how much good we want to do for the world, we can only do so much. So a question is like, how does that deliverable look like that we would put out and say, here it is? And that comes also from the perspective of how that tool can be most effective. So if it's a very long one, for example, it's not going to be very effective. If it doesn't clearly define all those elements that otherwise get confused and mixed, I don't think it's effective, because then someone says, well, okay, here's our vision, but what is our mission? Mm-hmm. So therefore it needs to cover the mission, vision, strategy, values, and the purpose, so that everyone can see that all of those elements are thoughtfully considered and they are in place, but they can't be long, like Google's mission to organize all of the world's information. Like, that's pretty straightforward. So that's my view for the deliverable, for it to be practical and useful. So considering, I think, what is the content now that we have captured, there is an exercise to be able to make sure that all of the things that kind of shine through from different perspectives get into their own kind of boxes, and that everyone can feel that, yeah, that represents my view as well.
I like what you were saying, Balto. I remember a COO of a major organization telling me that that they view their mission, vision, and purpose as a filter on which to bring together ideas and initiatives, to say it needs to come out of that filter the same way it went in, because whatever actions you take and initiatives or efforts or partnerships that you may build on, that if it doesn't filter through, then something is going to go against what you stand for as an organization. And at that point, you have to either revisit that initiative, partnership, effort, no matter how much money or notoriety or whatever it brings you, or you have to revisit your mission and vision and make sure that that still makes sense. So for him, it was a filter, and I like the way that that he looked at it as a guiding principle, right? So I think it needs to work in that like you said, for deliverables, it's a tool. It's basically just, whatever you need it to be to get you to that place where you want to go.
So, so from that perspective, I think that the question is like that how do we refine? We all know it's relatively easy to write long things. It's very hard to get things condensed into useful format and without losing anything essential, while then getting the end result to communicate exactly what the intention was. So that's the exercise, I think, what we are faced now. Like how do we condense that information that we have collected? And I don't think there's a need to collect a lot of more information. It's more of condensing it now and then cross-checking that with those who have not contributed first, so forth. So for example, if we would have that in an ESHIP to ask those questions, we would put that up front and say, tell us what is wrong with this, what is missing, what is here that you feel that is not there. So it's having something to then go and validate against those views that have not been captured yet.
Has everybody had a chance to look at, and I know Tiffany shared the link in here on the sandbox to, if they've not chimed in or feel like there's something missing. It's been a wonderful exercise to read what everybody's written so far, and it's an amazing document in itself to get to this point. So I'll share it again in the chat.
So I had actually had a chance to go through it this morning, and to my chagrin realized I hadn't thrown anything in there, so I added some things. But one of the it struck me that there were several consistent themes coming through, and I think, to Valto's point, I think pulling out those core themes into a much shorter document will be a chore, but I think that a lot of them are pretty self-evident. So I think that it's more of finding those threads through the document and then trying to put them out. Because when I was going through, I was trying to figure, okay, what new thing can I add? So I wasn't, so I had the advantage of coming in a little late on this in terms of actually contributing. So I threw out a few ideas, but there was nothing in there that I objected to or I thought was off base or anything else like that. I thought they were all pretty much, consistent.
So are we looking at creating something that follows the structure we just talked about with the hierarchy? I actually heard 6 things. I heard purpose, mission, vision, strategy, values, and then goals. So are we looking at creating some document that follows that structure that we can then share?
One thought I would have, and Kate, I think the answer is yes to that question, is,
Okay.
Valto shared the tool last call that was like the canvas. And then the canvas is helpful to get us down the road, but it is probably not the final thing you deliver. The final delivery in Valto, maybe if you've used that tool before, I don't know what the final delivery looked like when you use it, but I sort of look at what Mike just showed us and I'm like, man, if we could get a thing Mike showed us, but like in one short pithy thing, but like rather than take it just as a blank slate, write a new document, I think Valto's tool is really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I think my sense is we're at a process question, which is there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, 12, 13 people on this call. And we've all contributed to the sandbox, but how do we synthesize all of our rich inputs plus all the inputs pulled from elsewhere into maybe Valto's document or framework, and then how that framework transitions into kind of what Mike showed us in some flavor. That's my half thought.
If I can chime in, in a way, this is what I tried to do last week. You're kind of describing a wiki process where we start contributing, and through the collaborative editing process, it gets rolled up into a consensus for each topic, rather than appending to a long shared document and then trying to sort through it to figure out what the consensus is. So not that I'm pushing for any kind of product or anything, but it sounds like that process where, just like in one of the other groups, we were talking about definitions of entrepreneurship, and everybody can start contributing, editing, but eventually it settles in on whatever the group has edited itself to, rather than having one long thread, which you can see the progression of it. That makes sense?
So do we start with like an outline so that we don't end it with free-flowing stuff that doesn't work together? Do we start with this structure and have people start boiling things down into that structure?
I would have a suggestion here that it would be probably a good place to use an outsider, meaning someone who is not associated with any of this content that we actually have, like an editor in the book. They have a role to edit things without any motions. They just look at what needs to kind of what exists here, and how do we make it more clearly communicated from kind of professional language editing, someone who is very good with writing stuff, and then basically saying like, okay, take this content and make it fit to these boxes as an exercise, without having any emotions into the content itself, because they just look at what it says and try to put it into place, and then say, okay, create 3 different versions. If you have hard time, think of like perspectives and create 3 different versions, and then it would be, all of us would be in a neutral position to look at it after that, because none of us worked on it. We basically see the same outcome, because that process to go and edit that is actually not necessarily appreciated work, meaning that there's going to be people who say, oh, it's kind of missing this, it's missing that. And also, like, I'm just thinking someone who is more specialized in just narrowing down words and capturing the essence without having an ESHIP builder hat on. So that's just a suggestion for
So the
getting
boxes,
an outcome and then looking how that looks like.
when you said put things into boxes, are the boxes you're talking about the structure what we've discussed? You're saying they're put in boxes based on all the content they got. Would the boxes be these 4 to 6 things that we talked about? Whoops, we lost them.
He's putting the canvas up.
Okay.
The question you were asking, Katie, is, well, I think a bunch of people are asking is, how do we get from the long document of inputs to filling in sort of a first straw person version of this to then have the group have a conversation around it?
Yeah, it seems like the person who really is good at taking words and boiling them down would still need to know what structure we want them to put the information in. Otherwise, they come back with something that's totally there. And so this canvas, it looks like it has the purpose, the why, the vision, the mission, the strategy, the roadmap, which I assume are the goals or steps. Okay.
Yeah, and I was going to say, couple thoughts. Language-wise, obviously, we have some existing content that uses some of this language in a particular way that this community understands and accepts. So, for example, the ESHIP goals. That word "goal" is quite loaded now in a good way, but we have a lot of associations with when we say the goals. Everybody here automatically, I hope, or probably thinks ESHIP goals. And so just to say that however we use, frameworks that people may suggest, obviously taking into account what's already kind of accepted by this community, and really trying to fill in and land around that. I think this canvas is a great tool for that. I'll also offer, just to say, no pressure at all, but I'll say that maybe coming up with multiple versions could be something that different people do. Certainly it would be if one person does that or one group of people does that, you get one thing. But just to offer that, Scott Holzman, who I work with here, who has been at a few ESHIPs and is a poet and a writer, I would very much love his take on going through what we have and taking a crack at it. And I think he would be interested in doing that. So just to offer that to the group that has maybe one of multiple versions, that I think he's a person who I would say, why not take a shot at it, Scott? So again, not trying to in any way co-opt a process, but to say that he's somebody who could take one crack at it.
Well, since I've worked with Scott before, I think that's a great idea. He's a great idea.
I think Scott, I mean, just given Scott's ability, I don't know, for those of you at the first ESHIP Summit, Scott took 171 poems and made a master poem and somehow caught the essence of the room in this master poem.
Yeah.
But I think your point is very well taken, Mike, which is, because I guess I realized I was having anxiety over this, but I just realized why, which is if one person does it, that person is going to greatly shape what becomes the final thing. But if we had multiple versions, I mean, I don't think it has to be 13, but like 3 to 5, I have no idea, of just people taking it from their perspective, that then the next time we meet, if we could put them next to each other and say, okay, what are we seeing, feeling, sensing? Because I'll tell you, and I'll be super honest, my fear is that somehow this is going to end up with me having to synthesize it, and I really don't want to, because I wear a Kauffman Foundation hat, and it will overly shape this from an institutional level that I'm very aware, even if I try really hard to remember my roots of just being a local ecosystem builder, I will write something that has an institutional tilt to it. And so I'm happy to give feedback on stuff, but I shouldn't be the one.
Yeah, Andy, I don't know if I am so worried that one person's version of this is going to overly shape things. This is not a group of shrinking violets by any stretch. And so my sense is that I've often thought that it's just better to just start from some point, and if it doesn't work, we'll know that it's not working, and we can change it as we're going along. We've just been going through a strategic planning process with my board, and one of the board members put out a beautiful graphic that was to help kick off the conversation, and I could tell you that we didn't exactly follow it. That's for sure. The board, they all went off, and the group went off in its own direction, but it was a starting point. So I just think that Mike's idea of having Scott sort of take a whack and see if he can take all the elements that are in the document and put it into some coherence. I don't think that's going to unduly restrict us down the road, but that's just my thought. So.
Yeah, I would be in favor of that as well, because I think if we come back multiple versions, then we got to spend extra time reconciling those versions. Whereas if there's one straw woman that we can all kind of chew on, we might get to end results faster.
So go ahead, Mike.
A quick note that I made a note in the chat that if we did have a few versions or several, and CJ would look to your guidance or anyone else who has more experience with a wiki type process, but would gathering a few versions as input that then would be the starting point for a wiki that, yeah, and I saw you set that up, but just having a sort of a few touch points as an input to that rather than starting from scratch, does that work well?
What do you mean starting from scratch?
I mean, we have the huge. I'm saying is a sort of interim touch point of having a few drafts using this canvas. Is that a helpful point between the existing distributed knowledge and very long Google document and trying to get to one version that everybody says, here we go, here's our best version of this? Is there a way to use the wiki?
Well, that's sort of the purpose. That's sort of how a wiki works. is that, somebody puts up an initial version and anybody who's a member, if you will, of the wiki puts in an edit, and the others will either edit it or push it up. And so what you see, unless you're an editor, is the current roll up. But behind the scenes, there's a whole discussion going on. And we certainly can paste in what we've had so far. But this is sort of what you're talking about, is having people look at it and say, well, I want to put my input in. And somebody else can say, well, here's why I don't think it should be in there, or upvote it and it gets promoted. The reason I'm all for it is because as a newcomer, I've been very confused by reading hundreds of documents, and rather hundreds of hours of video and documents. Whereas this case, I can see the roll up, and then I can look behind the scenes to see the discussion behind it. And so you have the best of both worlds.
So Mike, what I was gonna suggest when you said more than one copy, and I kind of chatted with Christine, I've intentionally not added to the sandbox because I didn't, I wasn't sure which hat to wear personally, but if Scott we're interested in doing it, if we're talking about more than one version, Christine and I, wearing our respective community activator hats, could take some of those things and synthesize in, so we can work on a version as well.
And I think that's what I'm mainly wondering is,
the burden is not on any one person to synthesize. That's sort of the point of the wiki process.
And that's what I'm wondering.
Now between having the one guy take what's currently, all this messaging that's currently there, and coming up with a version following the Canvas structure that we would then all evaluate. Then there's having a group of people or somebody coming up with multiple versions, we will evaluate which path are we taking.
So if commenting only because I put that few versions comment out there, my point was that anyone who takes on a kind of a condensing task or putting things in a tighter way will have some kind of approach that they will use.
Right.
And different people will use different approach. So it would just be interesting to see the outcomes, or two or maximum 3 different approaches, to see how does the end result look, because the different approach was used. And then basically seeing, okay, but now we are already down to 3 summarized versions. Is say, okay, which one of these is best? Like, is there one that is already one and done? We all like the same one and then that's it. Or if it's like, okay, I think this is the best, but there's a couple of things in these 2 other things that if we could somehow move them into this one, then we would end up with the perfect one. So that was kind of like having this couple of steps to get to the perfect one, instead of trying to jump from, one approach will make it perfect, and accepting that if we use 2 or 3 approaches unaware of how the other approach will end up, we'll still end up 3 comparable canvases that we can say, okay, we all love number 1, okay, that's it, it's done. Or it's like, okay, we all have the same feeling of between these 2, okay, let's try to merge these 2, and now we have the final one. So that was my logic, that how to get to the ultimate goal.
So here's my concern. Let's perspective is a major determining factor here. So if let's say Scott comes in and his perspective, he's taking this and he's taking the perspective of the builder, and then his outline will go from that point of view forward. If another person comes in from the perspective of the ecosystem as a system, that's a very different perspective, very different set of goals, missions, visions, and so forth. And you can conceivably have multiple perspectives. Those aren't easily mergeable. And so, we, as I can see it, we can get into a discussion around from which perspectives that we start, and that can be a nice circular argument. I just, my sense is you pick one and you go with it, and then see where it gets you. And you find that you're at a point where you're not answering other questions, then you reconsider. But to have sort of completely 3 or 4 different complete designs, you're not making an apple to apple or apple. I mean, it's not even apples and oranges. You're apples and fruitcake kinds of discussions. And I just don't know where we'll get with that.
Well, my viewpoint is that if we don't have anything to compare with, we are left with what we have.
So I thought there was a discussion of taking all of the feedback that's already been put into this other document and boiling that down into something on the Canvas. So it's not like starting with nothing. It's taking out all the stuff that's already been provided and boiling it down to a Canvas that we would then evaluate. And so the idea of having multiple versions was going to do the same thing, except by multiple people, right?
What if we, and I guess I'm thinking about the wiki moment. When do you introduce the wiki moment? What if we did 2 or 3 versions? I mean, we've already have, I don't know, 100 people that have sort of input into that document, and particularly the folks on this call. So, I mean, there's a lot of perspectives in there, and say we boil that down to 3 versions, and I'm making this up because I don't know much about wikis, but then we can compare them on the next call, and then actually sort of, you know, take the stack from each of the boxes and put it into a wiki, and then use that process to sort of vote up, vote down, because I do think there will be different perspectives, but we got to start from somewhere. And I think all those perspectives are probably important, but I think we're not going to be able to, we can theoretically hash them out right now, like which perspective we take, but if we're actually like looking at data or not data, but like a suggestion from that vantage point, you can actually suss it out through a little bit more of the dialogue that happens around the wiki process. But understanding that divergent and diversity is actually important. So people are coming from different angles, that cues up a really interesting conversation that then.
So everybody's putting something in the wiki, or everybody's putting something into something else?
No, my sense is what Volto said, or was it Mike, but just boiling it down to 2 or 3 versions. Just let 3 people take the whole long list of input, give us 3 versions. They probably come from different perspectives. Obviously, the diversity of it is going to either make it hard to reconcile or give us new perspectives. And then get to those 3. And then I'd look to CJ on this one, but like within the actual wiki, like there's version A, B, and C, and put A, B, and C in there, and use the discussions in the software to actually figure out. I mean, we can use discussions in this group as well, but to figure out which boils to the top.
But you can easily paste it all in the wiki and then have everybody see the process, you know, the editing and discussion process. Look, I don't own any stock in the wiki company. I just, you know, I put it on there because as a newcomer, it seems to me that was the almost it's sort of a crowd process, with the crowd being just us. And and the other reason was because on some of the other calls, they were discussing the group, depending on what group it was, updating the real wiki, with the Wikipedia, with our preferred definitions of ecosystem and ecosystem builder. And so the best way to develop that might be privately and, you know, in our own wiki, and then put it on there. That was one of the other reasons, because in some of the other groups, there's a contention about definitions. But in this case, you know, just about rolling up, like in this case, what's the shared vision? You're free to use it. I'm just saying that it seems like if you're editing in documents is sort of you need a curator at one point, whereas the wiki is almost curator-less. So I was trying to save us work. I'm personally happy with any of it to see it, you know, in progress. It's just like I said, as a newcomer, I've been trying to go through all the documents and the videos, and it's hard to see what the current state of thinking is in any one of the initiatives. So, like I said, however,
so I'll suggest Scott is, I know, available and would be excited to take a crack at it. I think what I'm hearing, or what I'm personally feeling, I guess, is that we could put absolutely everything that's there and say anybody who wants to weigh in on this. I personally would find it really helpful to have that interim step of a couple first drafts at taking all that content and putting it into the canvas. And so even if we do all end up editing a wiki, I would love for somebody, and I like the idea that Valter said, somebody who's maybe a little bit outside this to take everything that's there and try and codify something as a draft. So I'm very happy to just say, is it okay with everyone if Scott takes a crack at that and we share that?
What I heard is that Christine and Cecilia have been talking and they would be interested in taking a crack. Is there anyone else in the group, either individually or in a small group, that says, hey, that would actually be something I would be interested in doing, is taking a crack, and then at the next gathering we actually have all three to look at?
I personally think it's great if whoever was working on the original documents, who has an intimate knowledge of it, were to take the first crack of summarizing it somehow, and then, you know, for the next step of collaboration. They could probably do it without injecting too much of an agenda.
Mm-hmm.
So that sounds like three. That sounds like three different versions, yeah. Right? So there's the Scott version, there's Christine and I, and then we can leave the canvas up for anyone in Slack who wants to come along and help work on the sandbox and the canvas together, so that by next month we end up with three.
And my one invitation would be that I think Hassan and Beth have also, you know, expressed interest in helping sort of narrow this. And I'm not volunteering you, Hassan, but perhaps you and Beth might be interested in discussing if you'd like to take a crack.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely happy to help. Yeah.
So I think the intent would be that we would have three versions of this, three takes at it, of the canvas based on what Valto has shared for our next gathering, and if we could share those out.
If we could have it before, so people could take a look at it before, that would be
perfect.
the best. Yeah. Awesome.
Okay,
so that's three versions or three revisions?
Three versions of the canvas with the information that's shared on the sandbox and all the other things that have been around the ESHIP verse for the past couple of years when we talk about high level stuff. So, so yes, Peter.
Quick question: should we be sure that we're talking three different perspectives as well as three different versions? So should we
love that? Yes.
The perspective.
I'm not sure how to do a, you know, I mean, for the solo version with Scott just taking the information that's shared and the knowledge that he has from working, you know, with the ESHIP community as a semi-outsider perspective is one. And then Christine and I as community activators who have varying levels of input and different touch points around the community and taking the information and putting that together. And then the other version would be everybody in the ESHIP community who wants to input on the canvas and add to it, as the other led by Hassan and Beth, if that's okay, Hassan, to just kind of, you know, put up guardrails as people are adding to it in a more open, collaborative way. Sounds like the three versions. Does that feel right? I can send, and what I'll do is I'll send an email to everybody who's on the call, and if that sounds like that's the direction that we're going in.
It sounds like too that maybe perhaps Hassan, Beth, Christine, Cecilia, and if Scott is wanting to play, could come together and sort of agree upon the task and the different angles, and then try to have that done by agreed upon date, so that everyone in this group can see it a couple of days in advance.
Okay, Hassan, I will reach out to everyone and we'll circle back, and then we'll send a follow-up email, or we'll post in Slack which what the parameters are going to be, so that everybody can kind of play along at home. How's that?
And then I think after the next meeting, it'd be interesting to talk about, or the next gathering discussion to talk about the wiki as the next phase potentially, because I think I see the value in what CJ's talking about.
Yes, absolutely. All right.
And a great way to involve lots and lots of people. I think that's great.
Yeah, it's rippling out further, right?
Like narrow, then go wide again. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
That was a very interesting, and I learned a lot in that discussion.
That was a very interesting Zoom call we just had.
I mean, in a good way. It's like, how does a group come up with this shared vision when no one's in charge? Like, how does that work? It's super interesting. I love it. It's just, it's so reflective of what happens in local communities too. It's like, what's the vision of Omaha? Oh, you know, it's just the same. It's the same challenge.
That's great. Thank you all for this great opportunity, and we'll be in touch.
Bye
See you
all.
all. Thank you.
Bye.